Hi, and welcome to the Future of Smart Cities by CM Industrial. During this week-long webinar series, we plan to find out how smart cities will impact the future of the industries that we serve as a talent solutions provider. I'm today's host, Bilal Ahmed, and this webinar is all about reaching carbon neutral goals with smart waste. To discuss this, I'm joined by an expert panel of well-established smart waste leaders. Before we get better introduced, just a quick reminder that we will be running a live Q&A later on. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll try our best to address them. Anyway, let's get started. Colin, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do at RecycleSmart.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be on the webinar today, talking about one of my topics that's most dear and exciting to me, which is smart waste. So my name is Colin Bell. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of RecycleSmart, and we are a B2B smart waste company based out of Vancouver, Canada. And we've been working over the past decade with various IoT devices to make waste and recycling collection more efficient, and more recently with camera-based sensors, also looking at ways to use smart waste to make recycling cleaner, so less contamination in the recycling stream going to processors.
Perfect. And Umutcan, if you'd like to also give us an introduction to yourself and what you do at Evreka.
Of course. Thanks a lot for this organization, and Colin as well, joining together with me. So this is Umut, one of the founders and CEO of Evreka. And at Evreka, we started to optimize the routes of waste collection trucks by using the fillness level data of those public bins. But on the way, we realized that this is only one portion of the big problem of waste management. Then we decided to provide the most comprehensive end-to-end waste management software platform for waste management companies and, in some countries, public authorities like municipalities. But currently, we are trying to close the loop, because what we say, like waste management end-to-end, is basically this half of the circular economy, and we are trying to copy and paste this circle, the half circle, to try to close the loop. So this is the new aim of our company. It's not easy, but we are trying to bring what we have learned from the waste management industry to the circular economy approach.
Brilliant. Thanks for that introduction. To get us started, then, can you quickly define what waste is to you? And Colin, if you'd like to answer that one first.
Yeah, sure. I think smart waste for me is using data, typically from sensors or some kind of gathering device, you might have on a truck or a container, to basically collect waste and recycling more efficiently. So right now, a lot of waste and recycling collection is kind of dumb in the way that it happens on a predetermined schedule and there's no data driving collection. So, the truck goes out on garbage day, it's Monday, and the truck's going to show up whether or not the bin's empty, or maybe it overflowed 2 days ago. So there's not really a lot of data driving the collection of waste and recycling. And then the other piece is what we can learn from the data, because if we think of waste and recycling generation, it's actually a really interesting data point in terms of our society. So if you think of kind of waste and recycling as the tailpipe of the economy, so the harder our economy is working, the more waste and recycling we typically generate. Obviously, we're trying to get better at this with diversion and reuse. But right now, typically when the economy is humming along, then we were producing more waste. And also from an intensity of use perspective. So if you're a city and you have, let's say, sensors on your public waste and recycling collection bins, it's a really good indication of are people using your park or your street? And maybe you can use that data to be smarter about other city services. So, for example, if there's a lot of waste being generated, likely means a lot of people. And therefore, you may want to send more other city services there, like parking and bylaw and street cleaning. So I think, at the beginning, it was just like, let's just send the truck there more efficiently. But now that we're starting to gather more data, I think there's some more interesting ways we can use that data.
Brilliant. And Umutcan, do you agree with that definition? Do you have much to add?
So I totally agree with Colin, and I would like to add some different perspectives on top of that. So for 7 years, we were looking at this same problem from the waste management company's perspective. But there are different stakeholders like citizens, regulators, producers, or retailers. So if you look at the smart waste management, so we are trying to bring all those stakeholders on the same table, and at the same time, they have a say and they have a responsibility. So we would like to put them into the same basket and try to find the best solution from the environmental, financial, and social perspectives. Because if you look at the waste problem as solely for the waste management company's problem, it's not the real case actually. So we have the responsibility as citizens, producers, retailers. So the smart waste management is a collaboration opportunity, in my opinion. On top of what Colin says, of course, these are all true.
Thank you for that. So how can smart waste help reduce carbon emissions from your perspective, Umutcan?
So obviously data is crucial. So we need to first have the data to make the calculation in order to understand what is the footprint of our activities, of our decisions. It can be like logistics decision, it can be purchasing decision. So we need to have the data to understand where we are right now. Then we can put a kind of KPI to ourselves, to our companies, to our countries. And then, of course, we can reduce it. So this is basically crucial. It's not possible without data, without smart approaches. And waste management is actually kind of essential layer of this issue. Because at the end of the day, if we consume anything, then we will have a waste. So the waste management is going to be there. And waste management is actually giving us kind of really good data of how we are living in our cities, in our apartments, in our companies. So it's really important. It's the starting point, not enough to hit the targets, but it's a must for sure.
And Colin, from your perspective, how is smart waste really contributing towards carbon emission and reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah, I think that right now it's kind of a direct relationship because a lot of the waste collection vehicles are powered by diesel or natural gas. So obviously the less miles driven, there's kind of this direct correlation between the carbon footprint of collection activities. I think though, as we move into electrification of collection fleets in the next decade, and that might even be faster, I think that we're seeing on the electric vehicle side on passenger vehicles, it's probably going to happen faster. Like once we get to a certain tipping point, we'll see things really take off. So then I think it's obviously, a lot of places will be generating electricity with a non-renewable, method at the beginning using, some kind of coal generation. So kind of that more efficient with electricity is also better. But I think the other piece, if we look just past carbon emissions, is like, greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at the methane that comes out of landfills, or when we're incinerating waste in some jurisdictions, then if we can be more efficient with our recycling processes, that might almost have a bigger impact. So if we're reducing tons sent to landfill or tons sent to an incinerator because our recycling programs are more, more data driven, maybe we're using cameras to reduce contamination, then that I think could have an even bigger impact down the road, is to say this is an integral part of making that supply chain of recycling more efficient and more effective. Because right now, for every ton we send to landfill in North America, especially where we have a lot of landfills, methane is a massive, greenhouse gas contributor. And even though a lot of the landfills do have good gas capture systems now, they're not 100%. And a lot of the older landfills don't have any. So I think we need to look at the whole picture.
Thanks for that. And is smart technology in the waste management world, would you say it's overlooked or undervalued when we consider the impact that it could have to reaching carbon neutral goals? Colin, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think both us and Evreka would agree it's undervalued because we'd like to increase our prices for sure. So, but no, I wouldn't say it's undervalued. I think it's just that we're at the beginning of the journey. And I think, both of us probably can say that a lot of times when we walk in the door, we're not competing against an existing solution. We're basically trying to sell the future, right? So I sometimes feel like on sales calls, like we're trying to sell email in the 1990s, and we walk in the door and we say, we've got this great technology. It does all these things. And people say, oh yeah, I have a fax machine. Yeah, I already got that. I have a fax machine. And we're kind of like, no, this is different. And so our challenge is like, how do we describe the difference between email and fax machines, right? Both send images quickly, over the telephone lines, but there's a big difference between a fax machine and email. And there's a big difference between having sensors in waste bins and actually using the data. And I think that, the full, ecosystem of truck collection, routing, billing, engagement with citizens, all those things have to come together for it to really work. And I think that the same thing with when we saw the evolution of email, the first version of email wasn't really that, fun. It was kind of a glorified version of a fax. But now, obviously, with email, we've got all kinds of, tools and tricks that we can use to really get the full value out of the tool. So I think we're just at the beginning of the journey. I'm excited to be out selling email version 1.1, and hopefully 1.2, 1.3 will be better.
Yeah. And Umutcan, would you agree to that? And do you have something to add as well?
Yeah, definitely. So there are like, I would say, a bunch of pioneers in the market like ourselves. So we have the challenges for sure. So we need to explain in the correct way to the current decision makers. So it takes time, it takes energy and effort, but if you are passionate enough, so you can go after your dreams, this is really important. And as Colin mentioned, the biggest competitor of us is do nothing decision. So they don't, they just continue what they are doing. But we need to show that it works, and do nothing decision is not the correct one. So at the end of the day, before they were not even waste bins on streets. Like we people were throwing our waste on streets, and someone were cleaning the streets. So there were no bins. So now we cannot think of any waste management operation without bins, right? So this is going to be like that. So it is not going to be without sensor or RFIDs or the fleet management software or customer management software, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, either we or some other companies are going to disrupt this industry, and we'll see the real results. But these kind of innovations in old school sectors like waste management has some challenges for sure, but it worked definitely from social, environmental, and financial perspectives, all of them.
Yeah, and we mentioned data a few times. So at the moment, is there enough data when speaking to waste management companies to really market the technology itself and sell it efficiently?
I would say yes. I mean, there's a lot of or more and more great case studies coming out of companies like Evreka, and if you look in the US, some really interesting studies of cities like Pittsburgh that have implemented smart waste solutions and had really a massive effect on their operations. I think the challenge is still kind of like everyone thinks that their operations are unique and special, which they are in their own way, but there is kind of some common ground that you can say, if you're driving around right now on a scheduled collection, you can likely, reduce your collection, expenses and miles driven by X percentage. But it's still a little bit, I think, in its infancy. And humans, I think, are kind of funny. Like we can tell, even though we're all the same, if I say to someone, oh, a city in, somewhere in Europe saved X amount, people in North America say, well, that's Europe, we're different here. And it's like, well, we are different, but like, we're not completely aliens. We're producing waste, we're putting in containers, we're driving around in a truck. So in North America, the challenge is more kind of getting more North American case studies up, because if Pittsburgh can do it, then Cincinnati can do it, right? Or if New York can do it, then Boston says, well, we can do it. Like, we're just as good as New York. But it's a lot harder to sell when we say, oh, this, city in Turkey did it. And they're like, oh, that's a different planet, which in reality, it isn't. Like, a lot of companies are selling globally and they go to cities all over the world. There are some regional differences, especially in the market. In North America, it's much more private sector driven. But in overall, even if it's a private sector or public sector, there's still the same common challenges of, lack of data, inefficient collection that I think, smart waste can solve globally, but it's going to take some time. And I think also the way that we sell solutions, we have to kind of localize them so they make sense, right? Because we can't sell it the same way everywhere in the world.
And Umutcan, what were your thoughts on that as well? Is data is there data out there?
Yeah, I would say like there is not enough data. So we are always trying to create those case studies to tell the truths, to tell the results. But of course, there are the proofs of these kind of systems. It's not a dream only. So the data is there, and the only thing that we need to maybe change from our perspective is to tell more, tell correctly and constantly in the correct places. So as Colin mentioned, so everyone is saying that we are different than there. Of course, they have differences, but at the end of the day, the waste management operations are almost the same. Doesn't matter which country, which city, which waste stream they are managing. The algorithm behind is almost the same. That's why we decided to cover the end-to-end waste operations from the generation till the MRF. So it's, but there are lots of things to do. To tell the truths from different sides of the world. And there is one advantage as well. There are like multinational companies working in different countries. So if you get one successful deal with one of those entities in one country, then they can tell their sister companies in different countries, which you cannot penetrate. So we are creating a case study in Singapore, for instance, and then jump to Hong Kong, then jump to Germany, because the company itself has this structure. So we are trying to hack these kind of challenges as well.
Yeah. And in terms of being carbon neutral, is it the full end-to-end smart waste solution that we really need, or is it kind of a step-by-step process by implementing, one by one sensors and then the full software systems? What are your thoughts on that, Colin?
Well, I think it's a journey that every city or waste collecting organization is going to have to figure out kind of where they are. And I think Evreka is probably the same as us. Some of our customers have quite advanced routing systems, and you're tying the sensor data into their existing system. And so it's that integration challenge. Others, you show up and they're still running on paper and clipboards, or they just have a driver that knows where the bins are and off he goes. So there's a really big variety of kind of sophistication. And one of the challenges is to kind of figure out, how to fit into where they are and how to get them to where they want to go. And I think what we've seen is at the beginning, when smart waste started to come out, we were kind of on the Uber of waste idea, where the driver jumps in the truck, he has a tablet, he drives off and picks up the full bins. And that was kind of the dream and the idea. I think after talking to more and more people in the field, it kind of became apparent that wasn't probably the case in 99% of the organizations. And so we had to look at organizations and say, okay, how could you use this kind of today, tomorrow, and in 5 years? And a lot of our customers right now are just looking to gather data, because again, they've never had the data. So the first thing they need to do is to gather data. And then once they have the data in enough quantity over a long enough period, then they can start to use that data. And it may be at the beginning not as sexy as Uber Waste. They may be just looking at their data and saying, oh, over the last 6 months, these 10 containers are always empty. So let's not pick those up as often. And maybe if they're always empty, maybe we should move them somewhere else. And then eventually they may decide to start to do some on-demand collection on some of the bins that are far off their route. So they might have a container that's, quite far off the rest of the route. So they start to do that one on demand, and then maybe gradually over time start to narrow that circle down. So I think that's kind of the piece, is the not, one size doesn't fit all. But I think the other piece that, companies like Evreka have identified is that you have to give kind of a full tool chest or a toolbox, because if you have one missing link in that whole piece of the smart waste system, then the whole system falls down, right? Great sensors, giving you great data, but then you can't route the truck. Well, then what do you do now, right? And then likewise, if you have great routing software, but the sensors don't work, that doesn't work that well either. So all the pieces of the puzzle need to work together in order to be successful.
Thanks for that, Colin. And Umutcan, if you had anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. And in one city or in one operation, let's say, there are different types of waste flows too, like on-demand, scheduled, different waste streams. So at the end of the day, if you cover one portion of the operation, then the missing portion is not working well. So the data is crucial, as I mentioned all the time. So we have to have the data, and the data should create the information and then create the new action actually. So what we are trying to do is to trigger all those actions, not to leave our customers with the data and try to find them okay, what to do now. But the smart systems we believe should tell what to do next, how to invest next. So these are going to be reducing the carbon footprint of waste operations, but it's not enough for the carbon neutralization, because this is only one portion of what we are doing as human beings. So we can look at the waste management perspective at one hand, but there are a bigger chunk in the portfolio of carbon footprint. So we have to take care of those parts as well.
Perfect. And so we have the technology now, and in terms of implementation, whose responsibility is it to integrate smart waste technology in a city? Colin, if you'd like to give your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think depending on obviously the city, but coming in from the outside, we often find there's kind of three main kind of areas that are looking to implement smart solutions. So it could be from the IT kind of smart city part of a city who's been tasked to go out to the market and find smart solutions and then take it back to their city. And then sometimes it is the actual waste and recycling collection department, like sanitation department or whatever it might be in a city, that's looking to be more efficient, or they've seen technology and they want to start looking at how they could use it in their operation. And then I think the other one is from really that kind of net zero sustainability side. So cities that are striving to go net zero, they're looking at all of their operations to say, how could we reduce the carbon footprint of, transit, waste collection, everything a city does, city buildings, things like that. So really the responsibility probably is kind of who has the budget and who's motivated to do it. And that could be regulatory. Maybe the sustainability department has a regulatory goal of, reducing carbon by X number of tons. So it kind of depends on, the city and how they're kind of structured, I think, for the most part. I think the integration, and probably the folks at Evreka can also agree on this, the actual implementation is probably one of the harder pieces. I think now a lot of companies have technology that works well. It's reliable, it's robust. It's actually getting it installed into the containers and making sure they work properly, training everyone. That is one of the bigger kind of pieces of the puzzle. And this would just be like trying to teach, someone how to use an iPhone. We have great technology, but if they don't understand how it works, and they don't understand the limitations of it, then the whole thing kind of falls down. So implementation, I think, is becoming more and more important as the technology matures.
Yeah. And you said motivation. Are you seeing an increase in motivation for this technology, especially with carbon neutral goals being introduced to certain cities?
I think we are, especially in the US with what's happening with funding, with kind of the new administration that's come in, we're seeing a lot more kind of, funding available for either improving recycling programs, especially in some jurisdictions like California. So that always helps, right? I think everyone knows that we have to change. It's more kind of like, if there's a will to change with a little bit of incentive, that really helps. It's kind of like, when you're going back to the gym and they're like, oh, we'll give you a month free. You're like, okay, I know I should be going to the gym, being healthy, but if I can get a free month, then let's do that. So I think those incentives to help kind of break down the barriers do help with adoption, but you have to have the rest of the pieces in place because, that free month is great, but if you don't execute and the system doesn't work, then at the end of that free month, you may not renew or continue on with the solution. So I think we are seeing definitely some increase in motivation. I think the cost saving piece has always been interesting because I think a lot of times we have led with kind of the cost savings, like, hey, this is going to save you money. And I don't know if that's always been that productive because some cities aren't that motivated to save money, or the way that their internal budgeting works. It's like, yeah, well, if I save money, like, doesn't mean anything to me. It just means I have less money in my budget. So I think we have to be careful about getting too hung up on like we're going to save you dollars, because that's not always the most effective way to sell the solution.
Yeah. And Umutcan, from your perspective, whose responsibility is it to really implement this technology, and perhaps more from a European perspective as well, would be good to understand.
So I believe this is totally related with maturity level of the cities, because if the country or city is mature enough, and from the budget perspectives too, so the city can trigger these kind of investments, I would say. But if those cities are not that mature enough from maybe perspective and also financial point of views, so the private sector can also take the role here, because these sustainable development goals and green deals are introduced, and those companies and countries have the targets. So and currently those companies are trying to find a way to contribute those targets, but they don't know what to do tomorrow in the morning. So they are looking for solutions to contribute. So I haven't seen any case yet, but those producers and retailers can be part of this challenge as well. So cities, producers, retailers, even citizens can get together, and well, the citizens are basically the consumers, are demanding sustainable products, sustainable services. So, but there is no sustainable product and service like fully. So demand is there, regulation is there. So this is the time that we get together and find the correct image, let's say. We shouldn't wait from the governments. We need to take the responsibility as the companies, as citizens, and create this kind of environment, because there is no time related with this 1.5 degrees.
Yeah. And how much demand do you actually see, Umutcan, from private sector customers compared to public sector customers or governments and local councils?
So currently, less than 10% of our customers are governments, remaining are the private sector. And we started working with retailers and producers as well, because they are the responsible of their waste, because of extended producer responsibility topic. So, and there is also a scarce resource issue too. So they would like to keep their waste as a secondary raw material for their production once again, because those big producers like FMCG companies are promising that we are going to have 100% recycled material packaging till this time. But how can you assure that? So their packaging providers are investing into recycling sector and then investing into waste collection sector. So this is actually started from the promise of the producer, and it started from the consumer demand. So it goes like that, and it happened within a year or two because the demand is huge. So there is an impact here. So we are mostly focusing on the private sector and trying to partner with them to reach their sustainability goals.
And Colin, what about yourselves at RecycleSmart? How does it compare public versus private customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still early in our journey, but really so far it has been more public sector in North America seems to be more motivated to adopt this type of technology. And I think it's probably just a little bit due to the different market dynamics between North America and say Europe or some places in Asia. In North America, a lot of the waste collection is private sector. Sometimes it's controlled by the public purse, but then it's contracted out to a private company to actually drive the truck down the road. And so there's a slightly different motivation because in the private sector here, the more those trucks roll, the more money a company makes because basically, for every collection they do, they get paid. So I think here it's more the public sector looking at things like carbon reduction, better service to citizens, citizens complaining about overflowing containers. And then if there's any regulation around, recycling or increasing recycling, then that helps obviously with the adoption of smart waste solutions. I think that may change though. I think what we're seeing here is it's getting harder and harder to get drivers to the point that, we saw over the pandemic that a lot of cities and even private sector had to reduce collections because they just didn't have drivers for trucks. And so if that continues, then I think we may start to see the private sector adopt this, not really as a environmental initiative, but as a survival initiative to say, we can't staff all these vehicles. We need to be more efficient. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues post-pandemic, but more on the public sector in North America for sure. I think that we will see an innovative private sector company pop up in the next couple of years in North America. I always joke with our sales team, I have this dream of, this young, kind of person taking over an established hauling company who's very tech savvy. And he decides that he's going to turn, this old school garbage company that he inherited from his dad or his mother into this technological kind of innovator. So if that person's out there, please get them to give us a call because we're looking for him or her.
Good to know. So, Colin, what are the biggest challenges we face in integrating the smart waste technologies into cities?
I think the biggest challenge is the change management piece. So the technology now is matured to the point where we have, lots of good sensors out there that measure accurately and connect. And so we're getting good data. And now I think with almost every client, the challenge is, okay, how do we change this route that you've been running for the past 20 years? How do we get your internal organization to kind of change from being a scheduled collection driven organization to being more data driven and more dynamic? And like we talked about earlier, that might come in phases, kind of start with some small low hanging fruit and then work our way up. But it's really the change management. I think that it's the same in any part of our lives. Humans are kind of creatures of habit. If I think on my personal life, I was using iTunes and Spotify for years and years, but, only in the last couple of years, I've been able to convince, some of my older relatives that they should, stop going down and buying CDs at the local store because they eventually got to the point where they looked at the technology and said, oh yeah, maybe this is more efficient. But it often took someone close to them to come and show them the benefit, even though, if you were kind of into smart waste, I think the benefits are already out there and we can see that this is really the way of the future, but it's going to take a while to get there. So the change management piece, I think, is the biggest piece. We've got great technology, great software from lots of companies around the world now. This is doable for sure. It's just, we need to figure out how to retrain the humans.
And Umutcan, do you agree? The biggest challenges?
Totally agree with Colin. So the technology is solved. The thing is that we need to convince people and change their behavior, and it takes time normally. Yeah, this is the biggest challenge.
Okay, interesting. So we have some questions from some of the participants that I'd just like both of you guys to answer if possible. So one from Vaseem Ahmed is, so much waste is being produced in developed and increasingly developed countries. Is there any country or technology that has a real handle on it? Umutcan or Colin?
I couldn't get the question. I was trying to read other questions, sorry.
No problem. So there's a lot of waste that is being produced in developed and increasingly developing countries. Is there any country that really has a handle on it, or anything that we can do with smart waste technology?
So I don't know if there is, but what we can do with these kind of smart technologies is to try to combine the best practices all around the world, because what works in Canada, for instance, can work in Singapore, or what works in Singapore can work in Sweden. So we need to learn from each other, because we have the same problem, although we have different maturity level in the countries, but the problem is the same, and we can help each other. This is our own problem. And maybe technology, this kind of data-driven technology, can accelerate this helping environment.
Yeah, I think I think really with smart waste is we have to realize that smart waste probably isn't going to solve waste generation and recycling itself. It's part of the puzzle. But there's, we have to look at the circular economy and how we manufacture goods, EPR programs and disposal. And so that whole piece. So if you think of smart waste in the circular economy, we're just a part of the wheel that gives you better data in order to inform, the rest of that wheel. So, for example, with EPR, it's like, how much material are you producing? Smart waste can give you really good data on how much you're recovering from the market. So if you're producing, 1 million tons and you're only recovering, say, 500, then you know that there's a big gap there and you've got to improve your collection system or education, things like that. So we're a piece of the puzzle, but it's not like smart waste is going to miraculously make everyone recycle tomorrow and fix our manufacturing supply chain and things like that. It's just going to give us the data to make better decisions.
Yeah. And if we talk about carbon footprint tracking, is it possible to combine the data that is available with LCA calculations in the back end to track environmental impact from cradle to cradle in real time? That's a question asked by Taha.
From my perspective, it's a really big challenge, like from cradle to cradle, because there are different steps in between those two cradles. But it doesn't mean that it is impossible. So we should start today. And currently we have assumptions, but those assumptions are not strong enough. So as much as we have data, the assumption will be improved. It doesn't matter if it is going to be like 100% correct assumption, but we will be improving those assumptions by the help of the data. It takes time and integration effort for sure.
Yeah, I think it's all about the data really on that one there. The more data we have, then the more precise, LCA calculations we can do. And right now, I think in a lot of cases, the data is pretty lacking. So even some data is better than no data. So if you think of it in a product, what's the carbon footprint to manufacture it, to ship it to the distributor, to ship it from the distributor to, the end user or the retailer. And then there's the reverse logistics, which is once we're done with that, what's the carbon footprint to pick up that material? And then does it go to a recycling facility? Okay, what's the carbon footprint of the recycling facility? If it ends up at a landfill, what happens there? So definitely with smart waste and other smart solutions, we can track all of those pieces. And then it's just a matter of, how accurate it is. And then what do we do with that data? So I think smart waste, if you think of it like reverse logistics, that's the best way to look at it, is we're tracking kind of that reverse logistic. Once everything has been manufactured and transported and consumed, we can help you figure out what the carbon footprint is to take care of that back end of it.
And Christopher asks, is it easy to integrate to current telematic systems? Colin, if you'd like to answer that.
No, I think this is 100% on Evreka probably has way more on this one than we do. I mean, we integrate, but really at an API level, but I don't know, do you want to talk? You guys, obviously this is what you do all day long. So
yeah, so basically if the current telematic system has those APIs or give the ability to integrate, it is easy for us to integrate with any kind of telematic systems. But of course we need to have a look in detail.
If it's running DOS, that may be more difficult.
Yeah, that's what I say. If it gives the ability to integrate, like APIs are the correct way to integrate nowadays.
Well, that seems a great place to leave it today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and a big thank you to today's panel. Apologies if we've not been able to address your question. I'm sure if you direct message myself or our panel, we'd be happy to respond with an answer for you. A video recording of this discussion will be released soon, so look out for that in your emails. We'll also be creating a downloadable PDF featuring today's main takeaways, as well as insight from our remaining The Future of Smart Cities webinars. You'll find the link to reserve your copy in the chat right now. And if you've enjoyed today's webinar, then don't forget, we are running lots more this week, covering the future of the water industry, manufacturing, smart buildings, and cybersecurity. The link to attendees is also in the chat. Finally, if you have any upcoming hiring projects, or you would like to find out how CM Industrial are striving to change the way the world sees recruitment, then get in touch. You can do so by sending me a DM or LinkedIn, or going to searchingindustrial.com. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you again for attending, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.